Travis Blake stood by the grill at a July cookout, smoke stinging his eyes. As a black single father in this small town, he had learned to stay measured, careful, quiet. But when he turned around, Vanessa was already there, a glass of water in her hand. She had caught him staring, a look that carried years of restraint. She held his gaze and lowered her voice. "I know what you're thinking, Travis." His chest tightened because she was right. She was married to Derek Hale, his closest friend in the world, laughing just a few feet behind her. Travis Blake had spent 12 years learning that furniture never lied about its age. Water rings, scratches, decades of bad varnish strip enough layers away, and the truth of the wood showed itself every time. His workshop sat on a quiet stretch of road on the edge of Savannah, Georgia, a converted garage that smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. At 36, he had built a name for himself, restoring pieces other people had given up on, and somewhere along the way, he had started applying the same principle to his own life. Keep what was real, strip away the rest, trust nothing until it proved it belonged. That principle had become law after his marriage to Monica ended. She left saying she wanted a life he could never give her one, with more money and fewer sawdust-covered afternoons, and Travis had raised their son alone ever since. He built a rule for himself in the empty months that followed. No woman crossed the threshold of his house unless he was certain she intended to stay. It was a simple rule, and for 2 years it had been easy enough to keep. Being a black father without a wife beside him meant people watched him more closely than they watched other men. He felt it in the grocery store, in the school pickup line, in the careful way neighbors asked how he was managing on his own. He answered those questions the same way every time, calm and brief, because giving anyone a reason to worry about him felt like giving them a reason to judge him instead. Derek Hale had never once made him feel that way. They had met in college, become the kind of friends who showed up without being asked, and Travis had stood beside Derek the day he married Vanessa. He remembered that wedding more clearly than he wanted to. Something about the way Vanessa laughed during the toasts had caught him off guard, a warmth he had no right to notice on another man's wedding day. He buried it immediately, told himself it belonged to no one, and did not think about it again for a long time. Derek was his family in every way that mattered. That should have been the end of it. It might have stayed that way if Derek's job had not started sending him out of town for weeks at a stretch. Vanessa began appearing at the edges of Travis's life during those absences, first with small excuses and then with none at all. She brought over a pan of lasagna one week because she had made too much. She borrowed a wrench the next and returned it with a jar of peach preserves she said she had no use for. She lingered by the fence between their yards longer than either of them ever admitted out loud, and neither of them ever suggested she leave. His son noticed her before Travis let himself. The boy started asking if Vanessa was coming by, brightening the moment her car turned into the driveway, saving her the good seat on the porch swing without being told to. Travis told himself it was harmless, the kind of warmth any family could use after a hard couple of years. But some nights, watching his son wait by the window for headlights that belonged to another man's wife, he felt something shift in a house he had sworn to keep steady. There was a version of the truth Travis could not say out loud, even to himself, and it had to do with how well they seemed to fit. He had built a life out of things other people threw away, proud of a home that was honest even when it was hard. Vanessa lived in a house that wanted for nothing except someone who actually looked at her. His marriage had ended because he could never give Monica the money she wanted. Vanessa's marriage looked comfortable from the outside and sounded almost silent from the inside, the kind of silence that grew between two people who had stopped reaching for each other. Two different kinds of loneliness had found each other without either of them meaning to look. It nearly surfaced the night Derek called Vanessa on video from a hotel room 3 states away. She was sitting on Travis's porch at the time, a glass of water sweating in her hand, and she stepped out of the camera's view before she answered the call. Travis listened from just inside the screen door. "I'm just out for a walk," she told her husband, her voice light and easy, in a way that unsettled Travis far more than guilt would have. She said it without a flicker of hesitation, the lie sliding out of her as naturally as the truth might have. Travis stood in his own kitchen and understood watching her lie so effortlessly that whatever was growing between them had already grown teeth. The walnut table arrived on a Saturday morning not long after riding in the bed of Vanessa's car, its surface dull and scarred from decades of use. It had belonged to her grandmother. She explained, one of the only things from that side of her family she had ever cared about keeping. Derek wanted it hauled to the dump because it clashed with the dining set he had picked out for their new house. "He doesn't understand why I can't just let it go," Vanessa said, running her hand along one scarred edge. "I was hoping you might." Travis looked at the table and understood exactly what he was being asked, and it had nothing to do with wood. Restoring it would mean 2 or 3 afternoons a week in his workshop, just the two of them, with no lasagna or fence line to hide behind. He knew what saying yes would cost him if anyone ever asked why. He said yes anyway, telling himself the workshop sat far enough from the house, far enough from where his son slept, that nothing built there could ever reach the family he had promised to protect. "We'll start Monday," he told her, and the words left him before he had fully decided to speak them. He wanted to see her again more than he wanted to keep the promise he had made to himself 2 years earlier, and that wanting alone should have frightened him more than it did. Somewhere in the space between a favor and a lie, Travis had already crossed a line he never meant to draw. The distance between a shoulder to lean on and a trap built out of good intentions was thinner than he wanted to admit, and once kindness needed a cover story, it stopped being simple. He spent the days after telling himself the workshop was safe ground, that nothing built there could touch the people he loved most. Some part of him already knew that wasn't true. The walnut table came to life slowly, one session at a time. Travis stripped the old varnish first, then moved into the deeper scars that told him how the piece had been used and neglected in equal measure. Vanessa started arriving on Monday and Thursday afternoons, sitting on the stool near the window with a book she rarely read, watching him work more than she watched the pages. She learned that he took his coffee black without cream, that he preferred silence in the first hour and conversation in the second, that his hands moved with the same patience whether he was smoothing a tabletop or answering one of her questions. Being understood in small, specific ways after 2 years of nobody paying attention had its own kind of gravity, and Travis felt himself pulled toward it more than he wanted to admit. One afternoon in early spring, Vanessa reached across the table to point out a knot in the wood grain, and her hand landed briefly on his. Travis pulled back before he could stop himself, the motion sharper than he intended. Vanessa searched his face for an explanation, and for the first time he gave her the real one out loud. "It's not just Derek," he said, setting down his sanding block. "My son already lost one home. I'm not about to be the reason another kid loses his." Vanessa did not answer right away. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him, and something in her expression told him she understood exactly what he meant, even if it changed nothing about how she felt. The rain came hard one night in early summer, and a burst pipe under Vanessa's kitchen sink sent her knocking on Travis's door past 10 o'clock, asking if he had a wrench and 20 minutes to spare. He fixed the pipe in 15. Afterward, they sat on his porch because neither of them suggested going back inside a glass of bourbon in his hand and a glass of water sweating in hers, the two of them close enough to talk, but careful to leave the length of an arm between the chairs. Travis kept glancing toward the hallway, where his son's bedroom door stood cracked open, half expecting to hear small feet on the floorboards, and the thought alone was enough to straighten his spine and shorten his answers. He told her it was getting late before it actually was, and he did not offer to walk her home. He started pulling back after that night, finding reasons to end their sessions early, letting phone calls go to voicemail longer than he used to. Some of it was guilt over Derek. More of it, if he was honest, was the picture of his son waiting by that window for headlights that belonged to someone else's wife, and the promise he had made not to let his own house become the reason a child anywhere lost the ground under his feet. Monica reappeared around the same time, calling to say she wanted to try again, that she had been thinking about what they used to have. Travis turned her down without much room for discussion. He needs stability. Travis said, "Not another chance for you to change your mind in 6 months." Monica did not take the rejection well, and a week later she let herself into the workshop unannounced, still holding a key from years earlier that Travis had forgotten to ask back. She found Vanessa sitting on the stool by the window watching Travis sand the table's edge with an expression Monica recognized immediately because she had once worn it herself. Monica did not say anything to either of them. She simply smiled the smile of someone who has just found a weapon she has been looking for without knowing it and let herself back out. The phone call to Derek came within the hour. Derek's voice was ice when he called Travis that evening. "Monica says otherwise," was all he offered, refusing to explain what that meant, or what Monica had told him, and the 15 years of friendship between them evaporated somewhere in the silence that followed. Derek rearranged his work schedule after that, staying closer to home, watching his wife with a wariness that had never existed between them before. Vanessa called Travis 2 nights later, her voice thin and uncertain, admitting she no longer knew whether what she had told her husband was the truth or a lie she had started to believe herself. Travis went looking for Monica, needing to understand what would make her do this to a family that had nothing to do with her. "Why?" he asked her, standing in her driveway. "If I don't get to be happy," Monica said, "why should you?" Travis looked at her for a long moment before he turned to leave. "You used to be his mother," he said. "I thought that still meant something to you." He did not wait for an answer. Derek showed up at the workshop on a Friday afternoon 2 weeks later, letting himself in without knocking. He walked past the walnut table now, nearly finished its grain glowing under a fresh coat of oil, and stopped at the shelf near the window where a coffee mug and a water glass had sat side by side for months, without either of them noticing how it looked to anyone else. "You have feelings for my wife?" Derek said. It was not a question. Travis did not deny it. He could have lied, could have reached for some version of the truth that sounded smaller than what it was, but he had spent too many years stripping varnish off other people's dishonesty to start applying it to his own life. "I see her," he said. "I've never touched her, Derek, but I see her and I can't tell you that isn't true." The punch came before Travis finished the sentence, Derek's fist landing hard against his jaw and sending him back against the workbench. Neither of them said anything else. 15 years of brotherhood ended in blood and silence, and Derek walked out without looking back. Vanessa's text arrived an hour later, 3 words and nothing more. "I'm sorry." Travis cut off contact with everyone after that, letting the workshop phone ring unanswered, keeping his door closed to neighbors who came asking if he was all right. What frightened him most was not the judgment he could already feel building around town, the whispers about a black father who had gone after his best friend's wife. It was the thought of his son hearing some twisted version of this story from another kid's mouth on a school bus someday, with no one there to tell him what actually happened and what did not. Truth rarely survives contact with someone determined to bend it into a weapon. Travis understood that now in a way he never had before. And he understood something else too. Refusing to hit back was not weakness. It was the last piece of dignity he had left to protect, held on to for the people who still deserved the best of him, even if none of them were speaking to him anymore. 3 weeks passed before Travis let himself leave the workshop for anything other than food gas or the short walk to his son's bus stop each morning. He worked 12 hours a day on the walnut table sanding sections that were already smooth, oiling boards, that were already smooth because stopping meant sitting still with everything he had lost in the space of one Friday afternoon. The phone stayed face down on the workbench most days, its screen dark against a growing pile of sawdust, and he stopped checking it. After the 4th or 5th missed call from numbers he didn't recognize, most of them customers who had heard something through the grapevine and wanted to see his face when they asked about it. Neighbors knocked twice that first week to ask if he was all right. Casseroles balanced in their hands the way people brought food after a death, and both times he answered through a half-open door, thanked them, and closed it again before the conversation could go any further than that. A regular customer stopped by near the end of the second week, an older woman who had brought Travis her late husband's rocking chair to restore months earlier, and she found him standing at the workbench with dark circles under his eyes and sawdust in his hair that hadn't been washed out in days. She didn't ask him what had happened. She only told him while he wrapped her finished chair in a moving blanket that grief had a way of making a person work with their hands until their mind caught up, and that he should let himself eat something besides coffee before the week was out. Travis thanked her, and meant it more than she probably realized, grateful for one conversation in 14 days that didn't require him to explain anything at all. His son noticed the quiet more than anyone else in the house. The boy asked once over a dinner. Neither of them finished why Uncle Derek hadn't come by in so long, and Travis had no honest answer small enough for a child to hold without something in it breaking him a little. He said only that grown men sometimes needed time to work things out and left it there, watching his son accept the answer. The way children accept most things, adults refused to explain fully with a quiet that looked like understanding, but probably wasn't. That night, Travis sat on the edge of the boy's bed longer than usual after the light went out, listening to him breathe, running through every version of this story the boy might hear someday from someone who wasn't his father, and none of those versions were ones Travis could live with. He thought more than once during those 3 weeks about what people in this town would say if the story ever reached them whole. A black father alone with his son for 2 years, accused of chasing his best friend's wife. He knew exactly how fast that version would travel and how little room it would leave for the truth, because he had watched it happen to other men before him, men who never got the chance to explain themselves before the town had already decided what kind of man they were. That fear sat heavier on him some nights than the loss of Derek's friendship, did heavier even than losing Vanessa might, because it wasn't only his own name he was protecting anymore. It was his sons carried into every classroom and every ball field in a town that remembered everything and forgave almost nothing. Working the wood became the only place his mind slowed down enough to think clearly, the only hours that didn't circle back to Derek's fist, or Vanessa's silence, or the sound of his own front door closing behind another well-meaning neighbor. He found a soft spot near one table leg during the second week, a section where the grain had rotted just beneath the surface, hidden under decades of varnish that had made the leg look sound long after it stopped being sound. He spent 2 full days on that single leg, stripping it back layer by layer under the hanging bulb until the rot was gone and the healthy wood underneath could hold weight again. Somewhere in that work, hunched over a table leg near midnight with sawdust in his lungs and his knuckles raw from the sander, he recognized his own reflection in it. 2 years of telling everyone he was fine. 2 years of layering coat after coat over something that had never actually healed. All of it done in the name of protecting a boy who deserved a father strong enough to be honest, not just strong enough to look unshaken. He thought about the rule he had built for himself after Monica left, the one that said no one crossed his threshold unless they were certain to stay, a rule he had been proud of because it looked like discipline from the outside. He had followed the letter of that rule and broken its spirit anyway, keeping Vanessa at the edge of his life instead of the center of it, telling himself distance made it safer when it had only made it slower to burn. He wondered whether he had spent 2 years hiding behind his son and his workshop, using both as a shield against a heart that wanted more than either could give it on its own, and whether that shield had done his son any real good or had only taught the boy that his father's heart was a room kept permanently locked. Good wood only stayed good under too many protective coats for so long before it started rotting from the inside, unseen, the same way he had, and he was no longer sure the 2 years he'd spent being careful had protected anyone at all. There was one night deep into the second week when Travis got as far as his truck before he stopped himself. He sat in the driver's seat with the keys in his hand for nearly 10 minutes, Vanessa's street already forming in his mind, before he made himself walk back inside. It wasn't fear of Derek that turned him around. It was the thought of his son waking up to an empty house because his father had gone chasing something before he'd finished cleaning up the wreckage he already had. He went back to his son's room, instead sat with him while he worked through a stack of math homework at the kitchen table a few nights later, and found more peace in checking long division than he had found anywhere else in 3 weeks. Being present for the ordinary parts of fatherhood, he realized, was its own kind of penance and its own kind of proof that he hadn't lost himself completely. Derek's call came on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks and 2 days after the punch, while Travis was wiping down the last coat of oil on the tabletop under the shop's single hanging bulb. He almost let it ring through to voicemail out of habit before he saw the name on the screen and answered anyway, his thumb hovering over the button for a second longer than it needed to. She filed for divorce this morning. Derek said no greeting first. His voice stripped down to something Travis hadn't heard from him in 15 years of friendship. I wanted you to hear it from me instead of somebody else telling you at the hardware store. Travis sat down slowly on the stool by the window, the same stool Vanessa used to sit on with a book she rarely read, and said nothing at first because he didn't trust what would come out if he opened his mouth too fast. 15 minutes in your workshop made her feel more heard than 3 years living with me. Derek went on each word, sounding like it had cost him something to say out loud. I've had a lot of time to sit with that. I believe it's true, and that's the part that's hardest to swallow, harder than the affair I kept accusing you of that never actually happened. Derek, I never meant for any of this to happen, Travis said. I want you to know that whatever else you believe about me now. I know, Derek said, cutting him off, though not unkindly. I know you didn't chase this. I've had time to see that too, more time than I wanted, lying awake most nights trying to find a version of the story where you're the villain and it doesn't fit anymore, no matter how hard I try to make it. He went quiet on the other end for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed lower and more tired than Travis had ever heard it. He told Travis he had also cut Monica out of his life completely once he understood how deliberately she had thrown the match that day in the workshop. She hadn't come to protect anyone's marriage by telling him what she saw. She had come to burn down whatever happiness Travis might have built without her standing somewhere in the middle of it. Derek said it like a man setting down a weight he had carried alone for too long, and then the call ended without either of them promising anything about what came next. Both of them still standing in the wreckage of a friendship neither one knew how to rebuild yet. Vanessa came back to the workshop 2 months later on a Saturday morning carrying no excuse and no borrowed tool, no dish that needed returning to anyone. She stood in the doorway a moment before she spoke, sunlight behind her outlining the shape of her against the gravel lot, and Travis set down the brush in his hand and weighted his pulse loud enough that he was sure she could hear it from across the room. I didn't bring anything this time, she said, stepping inside. I came for you. Travis wanted to cross the room and answer her the way he had wanted to for over a year, now every part of him leaning toward the doorway where she stood. He made himself stay by the workbench instead, his hands flat against the wood to keep them still. He told her he needed time, not because of Derek anymore, but because he owed his son certainty before he owed anyone else anything at all. He had already watched one home come apart around that boy once. He would not build another one on top of a feeling that hadn't been tested against an ordinary Tuesday, against school mornings and sick days, and all the unglamorous weight of a real life that no walnut table could capture. I'm not asking you to choose today, Vanessa said. I just needed you to know I'm not going anywhere this time, no matter how long you need. Vanessa nodded when he finished, like she had expected that answer and respected him more for having expected it correctly. Before she left, she set her water glass down on the beeswax-finished tabletop and forgot it there, or maybe she didn't forget it at all. By the time Travis noticed, a faint ring of condensation had already dried into the wood, a pale circle he could have buffed out in 30 seconds, with the cloth sitting right beside it. He left it there instead, the first mark on a table he had spent months restoring to look untouched, and something about choosing to leave it felt like the truest decision he had made in months. The months that followed moved slower than either of them wanted. And Travis kept it that way on purpose. He introduced Vanessa to his son gradually, an afternoon at the hardware store first, then a Sunday dinner that lasted longer than any of them expected. At that dinner, his son asked Vanessa, without any warning, whether she was going to start coming around again like she used to. And Vanessa set down her fork before she answered him honestly, telling him she hoped so, if that was all right with him. The boy considered it for a moment with the seriousness only a child can manage over a plate of chicken, then said it was fine as long as she still let him have the good seat on the porch swing. Travis watched the exchange from across the table and felt something in his chest loosen that had been tight for months, some fear he hadn't fully named until he watched it dissolve on its own. He kept watching carefully after that for any sign the boy felt something being taken from him instead of something being given back. What he found instead was a child who had already made room for her months earlier, back when she used to bring lasagna and linger at the fence, and Travis understood then that some part of his son had been waiting on his father to catch up the whole time. The call to Derek came before Travis let himself take any of that further, because some part of him refused to build anything new on ground he hadn't finished clearing first. He asked to meet at the bar on River Street, where the two of them had celebrated nearly everything worth celebrating for 15 years, birthdays and promotions, and the night Derek had called him at 2 in the morning to say Vanessa had said yes in the parking lot outside. They sat across from each other in the same corner booth for a long stretch before either man said anything, both of them turning their glasses in slow circles on the scarred wooden bar top. Years of shared history sitting between them like a third person neither one wanted to acknowledge. "I'm not sorry for what I felt," Travis finally said, keeping his eyes on the glass instead of on Derek. "I can't be sorry for something I never chose and never acted on while you two were still together. But I'm sorry I let you find out the way you did. You should have heard it from me standing right here in this bar, not from Monica showing up in my workshop looking for a reason to hurt somebody." Derek turned his glass another slow circle before he answered, and when he did, his voice had none of the ice left in it from that phone call weeks earlier. "That punch wasn't only about you and Vanessa," he said. "Some of it was shame. I didn't see my own marriage falling apart until another man saw it before I did. That's a hard thing to swallow from your best friend, harder than the thing itself, if I'm being honest with you right now. I should have told you what I was feeling the day I first noticed it," Travis said. "Instead, I told myself it didn't matter as long as I never acted on it. I was wrong about that. Silence isn't the same thing as loyalty, even when it feels like it in the moment." "Maybe," Derek said. "Or maybe you were just a better man than I gave you credit for, right up until you weren't sure you could keep being one." He shook his head slowly, staring into his glass. "I keep going back to that walnut table. 15 minutes of you fixing a chair leg, and she felt more like herself than 3 years of vacations I planned and a house I paid for in full. I built her a life. You just looked at her." Travis thought back to the wedding 15 years earlier, the two of them standing in matching rented suits, Derek gripping his shoulder and telling him he was the only man he trusted to stand up there beside him. He wondered if Derek was thinking about that same day. And from the way Derek's jaw tightened around his next sip, Travis guessed that he was. "You were a good husband, Derek," Travis said. "I never once thought otherwise. Some things just don't hold together no matter how much a person's trying." Derek didn't answer that directly. He only nodded once and let the silence between them settle into something less hostile than it had been an hour earlier. Travis had no answer for that, and he didn't try to manufacture one to make either of them feel better. They didn't reach for each other across the table, and neither of them pretended the 15 years could go back to exactly what they had been before a single Friday afternoon in a workshop full of sawdust. But when they finally stood to leave, Derek held out his hand and Travis took it, and something passed between them in that grip that felt less like forgiveness and more like the start of a different kind of respect built carefully on top of the wreckage of the old one. It wasn't friendship restored. It was two grown men choosing not to let bitterness finish what one punch had already started years of history trying to undo. A year later, they crossed paths again outside a hardware store on an ordinary Saturday afternoon, and the meeting carried none of the old weight between them anymore. Derek had someone new beside him, a woman with an easy, loud laugh that matched his own energy in a way Vanessa's quieter nature never quite had. She introduced herself to Travis with a handshake and a smile that suggested Derek had already told her enough of the story, that she wasn't walking in blind, and Travis appreciated that Derek hadn't tried to hide any of it from someone new in his life. They stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes talking about nothing important, a new roof Derek was putting on his house and a football season. Neither of them expected much from, and before they parted, Derek said what neither man had been ready to say inside that bar the year before. "Neither of us did anything wrong," Derek said, shaking Travis's hand a second time in 12 months. "We just needed different things, and it took losing everything to figure out what those actually were." Travis agreed, and for the first time since the punch landed, agreeing with Derek didn't cost him anything to give. 2 years after the walnut table first arrived, scarred and forgotten, in the back of Vanessa's car, she moved into the house Travis shared with his son, bringing 3 boxes of books, a coffee maker that matched the one already on the counter, and a framed photograph of her grandmother that she set on the mantel without asking permission first. Travis's son helped her carry the last box in from the driveway, insisting on taking the heaviest one himself, even though it nearly buckled his arms. And Vanessa let him understanding, without being told, that he needed to feel useful in the moment his family was quietly becoming whole again. That evening, Travis stood at the same grill where this entire story had started years earlier, smoke stinging his eyes the same way it had that July afternoon, except this time when he turned around, it was his own front porch. He was looking at his own family gathered on it, and no one there he needed to hide anything from. Vanessa caught him watching her from across the yard and lifted her water glass toward him instead of saying anything, a small private joke between the two of them that no one else at the gathering understood, and Travis laughed for the first time in longer than he could remember out loud in front of everyone. The fear he had carried during those 3 weeks alone, the one about what the town would say about a black father accused of chasing his best friend's wife, never fully disappeared, but it stopped running his life the way it once had. People talked for a while the way people in small towns always did, and then they moved on to someone else's story the way people in small towns always did that too. What stayed in the end wasn't the gossip. It was his son coming home from school one afternoon to say a classmate had asked if Vanessa was his new mom, and the boy had answered simply that she was family, no further explanation needed or offered. Travis heard that story secondhand and understood it had answered a question he'd been too afraid to ask out loud for 2 straight years. They ate dinner most nights at the walnut table now, its surface covered in a small constellation of pale rings left by water glasses, set down without thought, each one a quiet record of someone choosing night after night to stay instead of leaving. Some evenings, Travis caught himself watching those rings, instead of his plate tracing the overlap of newer marks against the first one Vanessa had left behind on a Saturday morning, 2 years earlier, the one he had never wiped away no matter how many times the cloth sat within reach. Travis's son had a whole family again, one built slower and more honestly than the first, and the sound of laughter had finally found its way back into rooms that had gone quiet for far too long. On Sunday mornings now, Vanessa made coffee the way Travis liked it without needing to ask, and his son had taken to setting 3 places at the table without being told. A small habit that said more about how settled the house had become than any conversation ever could. Travis still spent most weekday evenings out in the workshop, and some nights Vanessa brought her book out there again, not to hide behind an excuse this time, but simply because she wanted to be near him while he worked, the two of them existing comfortably in the same easy silence they had once been too afraid to trust. Travis thought sometimes standing at the head of that table with a dish towel over his shoulder that love wasn't the lightning strike people sang about on the radio. It was quieter than that, closer to the sound of a water glass set down on a table every single morning by someone who fully intended to still be there the next one. A person didn't get to choose who they felt something for in the first place. They only got to choose how they faced it once it arrived, and what they were willing to build patiently and honestly out of that choosing one ordinary evening at a time. He thought about the 2 years he had spent believing that keeping everyone at arm's length was the same thing as keeping them safe, and how wrong he had been about that, and how much of that time he could never get back now, no matter how many coats of oil he rubbed into old wood. He looked at the table some nights and wondered how many other people out there were sitting on, a feeling they had never said out loud, waiting for the right moment or the safest excuse to let it stay buried a little longer, the way he once had, certain that silence was the same thing as strength. He wondered how many of them would still be waiting 5 years from now if no one ever gave them permission to stop pretending. If that sounds like your story tonight, ask yourself just one honest question. What exactly are you protecting by staying silent, and is it truly still worth protecting? If this story moved you even a little, like it, share it with somebody who needs to hear it tonight, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. True happiness is never built on taking what belongs to someone else, no matter how empty that thing looks from the outside. It grows instead from honesty and from the courage to let go of what was never truly yours to hold in the first place. Given enough time, the truth strips away every misunderstanding, one careless layer at a time, leaving behind only what was real all along the worth of people who choose again and again to live honestly and love with responsibility.